Okay, so all right, so this is our agenda for today, and we're gonna stay as true to this as possible, just simply because with the virtual meetings, the things that I've discovered is if you put times on things, um, people people kind of rely on that. So if they can't attend an entire meeting, they want to come in at the times that where a subject is being addressed that they may want to hear. So we're going to try to stick as close to these times as possible. My hope is that is that all of our speakers will be ready to go with, as we finish certain things. With these first updates, there's a few, just a few different things, because some of these efforts have not necessarily continued as quickly as we would like for them to. So the first one that we're going to talk about is the 600 series and where we are with that. And so this particular effort has been going on for quite some time. And I know that there's a lot of interest in us getting this, this effort complete, just simply because the 600 series methods 608, 624, and 625 revisions were approved sometime back in September of 17 and in one of the last MERS. And at that time, the EPA requested assistance from the lab community to collect the QC criteria so that we could actually update these methods. And so it's an effort that started some time back, but it kind of just languished. In the process, we formed a stakeholder group and we gathered representatives from TNI, ACIL, WEF, APHL, municipalities, commercial labs. EPA was involved. We put out a survey and we surveyed the testing community to see how much support we could get. And I think to date, we've got 23 total labs that have agreed to support this effort. And the effort itself is actually using data that has already been ran by laboratories. The data that's already out there is the data that's been done since the methods were revised. So the revision of the methods was actually put in place by labs right after, and in some cases before the actual revisions were approved. So there's a lot of data out there. So the particular data is available, and the study plan, which is an effort that was adopted by the EMC, and you'll hear more about this from David here in just a few minutes on the Environmental Monitoring Coalition. The EMC actually adopted this particular effort because it didn't really land in a specific spot. But the EMC, which was formed in 2020, it actually is pushing this effort forward. The last study plan came out in January. Jerry Parr put it out. It's a result of many months of input from all of the stakeholders, and basically requires the data to be put out in an EDD format that meets criteria that all of the laboratories can support. So majority of the commercial labs especially have the capability to generate just about any kind of EDD. So the data itself will be put out in that format. So right now we've just got to get it finalized. But the purpose of it, of course, is to be able to provide quality control data for these methods without having to reinvent the wheel. I mean, the 600 series methods have been around for quite some time. Laboratories have been running data for years. So being able to put forth the data from the labs in a format that it can be kind of distilled down and used for quality control criteria is basically the purpose of the effort. Dave Friedman, did you want to add anything to that? I mean, that's right now, that's where the effort is from where I see it, but you may have some additional information.
No, I have nothing to really add. You've covered it.
Okay. Then we will move on to, well, let me see if there's any questions. Anybody, I know there's some folks on the phone that have been involved in this effort. Do you have any questions or comments on this particular effort? Okay, so hearing none, one of the things that I do want to add to this is that as we move forward, we will be reaching back out to the laboratories that have committed to support this process, as well as we will probably make, if you will, a last call for other labs who may want to participate. This is a big effort, and we all know that. And bringing the data together, of course, is going to be the biggest part of this. So running the statistics and getting that information together is going to be the biggest part of it. But at least we're at a place now where we have a good study plan that has to be approved still, but we feel like it's at the point that it will be, and then we can move forward with the effort. So it goes on top of other efforts that we have going that we'll talk about. But this is one of the most important ones because it will give us the necessary criteria that we need for guidance for quality control for these methods. With that being said, I'm going to pass the baton to Dave Friedman to talk about method 3050C.
Okay, as everybody probably know, 3050 EPA, the SW846 program came to us for assistance in updating their method 3050C to change the way the digestion is done in order to allow one digestion to be used for all the metals, including the silver and such. A program was set up with them. A couple of our laboratories participated. Augustine, I don't know if he's in here, but he and also Michelle's laboratory both participated in that, and the study was done. The EPA study leader, Christina Langlois Miller, has since left the SW846 program. She has moved to the Environmental Laboratory Response Network program at EPA. There's a graduate student, a postgrad student who's working at the Office of Solid Waste Office of Resource Conservation Recovery on this method. As of right now, the EPA has the data from the study, and they're finishing working up on the statistics. They've done the statistics and really waiting for a finish the QC review of the data packages that came in. Report I have is that so far the data is looking very good, except for antimony, and in that case, it's no worse than the current 3050B method. So as soon as they can get that all squared away, they'll be in a position to update the method, and we'll have EPA, the people from that program next week on our call, and they'll probably go into a little more detail with that. Plus, at the NEMC, there's going to be a presentation of the results. Anybody have any questions on that particular effort? Okay. Should I go on to acrylonitrile, Judy?
Yes, please do.
Okay. As you know, through the EMC, we've been working on a project to demonstrate to EPA that using a pH less than 2 as a preservation method for water samples, wastewater samples with acrolein and acrylonitrile, and extending the holding time would be acceptable. A study plan was adopted, and samples are currently in the process of being collected and analyzed. I know there's one particular sample of groundwater that is actually being supplied to us by one of the regional EPA regional laboratories. They're just waiting for their analysis of the samples to be finished for their other purpose, and then they'll free up. So hopefully within the next week, our laboratory, the laboratory in our program who's getting those samples, will have those samples in about another week or so. And So the study is going on. Laboratories are collecting, receiving, and analyzing the samples. Right now, everything is still on track for us to have the data and everything to be able to report the results at the NEMC, at the ACIL session at the NEMC, and then later on to get a more complete report to EPA. Any questions on that? Judy, I'll move on to 200.8. The EMC had, as everybody knows, there's been an effort to upgrade the drinking water method 200.8 ICP-MS to reflect modern interference rejection technology. That's been going slow, so the EMC has decided to try to work with EPA on that. At the last meeting, the EMC set up a task group to work on the issue. The task group met and is recommending to the EMC that the preferred approach that they would like to do would be for the EMC to establish an industry, EPA, state, and municipal government task group that would provide guidance to EPA on how best to address any of the remaining issues holding back the method. And also, once the method, a draft has been finalized, to help work with EPA, ACIL, IL, APHL, ASTM, and so on to validate the method. The next step is for this recommendation actually to go to the EMC board on next Monday at their meeting. If the board approves that approach, then we'll ask EPA's Office of Research and Development and Office of Drinking Water if they're willing to work with the task group in this manner. And if EPA agrees, then we'll ask EPA for a copy of the latest version of their updated draft method. And that'll get reviewed by the task group. Any issues that the task group sees with that method then would be discussed at a task group meeting with EPA and see if the differences can be worked out, and then come up with a plan for how to get whatever comes out of this effort validated. Both Jack Creed and Dan Houtman, they're from EPA's Office of Research and Development. Jack is the researcher who's dealing with 200.8, and Dan is from the Drinking Water Regulatory Program, are planning on participating in next week in the EMC meeting next week. So hopefully, if everybody agrees to this, we can start moving things forward. Any questions on that?
Hi, David. This is Lem. I just a heads up. I just saw Jack Creed submitted an abstract for the NIMIC conference, so he is planning on presenting something.
Yes, I reached out to him a couple of weeks ago because the EMC was hoping he would be able to make a presentation at the NEMC. I reached out to him and asked him if he would. He said yes. He put together an abstract, and yeah, as you indicated, it's been submitted. Now, it's right now, I think it's in he submitted it for your session on collaborative efforts.
Yeah,
But I don't know if you have room for it there or if
you,
you'd rather it be in
you
another
can make
session.
we can make room. Actually, we can make room because that's one topic that people are very interested in. And I did see something where they were trying to pull it into a metal session. Nevertheless, we will make room
But
for
yeah,
that.
it's your call where it goes. But I know he submitted it to your session. So
Right. He could actually present it in all the sessions. I think everybody wants to. I'm just kidding.
I told Jerry he can make a call on where it goes because there's a
Right.
lot of appropriate places for it.
Yes. That's
So
fine.
so that's where we're staying on 200.8. I hope that we can move that thing forward finally after years. Let me just quickly run through a couple of other small items from the EMC. the TNI program had developed a language on initial the accreditation standards on initial demonstration of capability, and the so that has in it a table of basically how many errors one is allowed to have in a demonstration. When you're talking about a method that has a lot of analytes, a lot more than 11, analytes, and pretty much there's a good chance that randomly there'll be a couple that are out of spec. How many, and they included in there this draft language of the demonstration capability language for the accreditation purpose, how many failures you can have without failing, basically. And this they took from the EPA Office of Solid Science and Technology demonstration. And so that's being discussed right now. There are some questions on the exact language because the demonstration is you're doing a number of replicates. So the question is, if the same analyte, for example, was to fail in all the replicates, is that really random, or is that should be considered something that there's a problem that needs to be looked at? It's one thing if you get one failure of one analyte on one of the replicates and a different failure on a different one and so on. But if you're getting replicate failures on the same analytes, that's of concern. So the EMC is still discussing this TNI language, and we'll see what comes out of that. Also, the EMC has been working on a letter to EPA, the new administrator, and basically introducing the EMC and offering to help in whatever way possible to help the agency in its efforts dealing with monitoring and methods and so on. That is being refined. My expectation is that that'll probably be put to bed at this next meeting. And now that EPA has a new administrator, Michael Regan, it'll get sent to the agency. Anybody who's interested, who hasn't seen it, there's a very nice article on Mike, the new administrator, in today's Washington Post, a big article about it. Very nice article. So I'll probably try to copy it and just send it to everybody in EMC and in the ESS section if you're interested. That's about it that I think is important to cover on the EMC. Does anybody have any questions about anything that the EMC is doing that I didn't cover or Judy didn't cover?
I don't have a question, David, but I do have a request. For those who are on the call that may not know the history of the EMC, do you mind just explaining what EMC is? And can you give us some thoughts on the status or not of ELAB?
I don't know what the status of, well, under the last administration, the Environmental Laboratory Advisory Board was closed down, along with a number of other, advisory committees, outside advisory committees. In response to that, a number of organizations, basically ACIL, the NELAC Institute, APHL, Water Environment Federation, got together and set up a new organization they call it the Environmental Monitoring Coalition, to serve as a way for non-EPA monitoring community to come up with recommendations for the agency that could, and also not only for EPA, but also for states on monitoring issues, monitoring quality assurance and so on issues, and to try to work with the agency in a manner similar to what the Environmental Laboratory Advisory Board was doing. As a result, several of the members of the old lab were invited to serve on this EMC board, as well as representatives, some other individuals with expertise, and also representatives of the organizations, the founding organizations. And what some of these issues that the EMC is working on were ones that were originally were ELAB issues that just were left hanging. So, and how much more detail, Judy, you think that's enough coverage?
Yeah, I think that covers it. I just kind of wanted to give everybody an idea of how the EMC came about and why, because I mean, realistically, I mean, we have a number of groups. I mean, we have our group within ACIL, we have the TNI and the multiple committees and things there, as well as other organizations that have their own committees. And so, you know, the idea of bringing the EMC into the fold was again, as you've already explained, you know, because of the disbanding of ELAB and as a federal advisory committee. So I don't know. We've kind of heard rumors that there might be a reinstatement of some of the federal advisory committees, but we don't really know. And honestly, because of the work that the EMC is doing, because it seems to bring together multiple organizations, I think probably the status of EMC, even if ELAB comes back into play, I think EMC will stay, you know, will continue on. So anyway, it's just, I think it's a very important committee, and I think they're handling a large number of things at this time, and I think that we will see a lot of good progress on these efforts.
Just to give an example, like on the 200.8 effort, when the task group was formed, we've got 2 of our ACIL member laboratories. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 ICP-MS manufacturers in the work group. We've got 2 states, Department of Environmental Quality laboratory people on it. We've got consultants, Mike Flournoy, for example. And so, as Judy pointed out, when we work on something, we're able to get a pretty broad representation of the community to help out. And so far, it seems to be working very well. Hopefully, it'll accomplish a lot. Okay.
David, could I ask one question about 200.8?
Sure.
Do you have any idea, an estimate of how long this process will take? I mean, it's not like it's urgent to use that method at this point, but it's been since 2006 that this issue has been kind of hanging out there.
If you ask me that next Friday, I think I'll have a much better idea.
Thank you.
It's all going to depend on I'm pretty sure, given the work, the makeup of the work group, that the EMC will go along with the recommendation of how to proceed. And then the question is going to be, will EPA agree to that approach and participate? And if they agree to that, I think it can go on pretty quick. It could happen. I think the issues, some of the issues have to do with modifying instrument software, There are issues related to laboratory, reference standard, purity. There's other issues related to how low do you need to go given the regulatory programs need and so on. But I think those things should be relatively addressable if everybody sits down and works together. So, but we'll know it, for example, at our next meeting, or probably next week at our meeting. I should be able to answer that question when everybody gets together at session 2, P2 session 2.
I do have to say it'll be interesting to see what kind of strategies come from some of the efforts, because I really believe that we're going to get a lot done in this year coming up. So it's kind of exciting because some of these things have been on the books for quite some time with different organizations. So and they just kind of bounce around. So my hope is that that we'll be able to come up with some really good strategies and timelines and get them moved forward. All right, David, if there's no other comments from you, we're going to move on to the ILI projects and plans, and Zoe Grosser is going to give an update on the Analyst Enrichment Program. Zoe, if you don't mind, do you mind giving a little bit of history on ILI?
Sure, I can do that. Perfect. Okay, so let me give you a little background on ILI. ILI is the branch of ACIL, which is a nonprofit 503c1 corporation. So because we are not a lobbying organization, ACIL has that task. ILI can do other things. And ILI has been focused on educational efforts, research efforts, efforts to try to help the industry to improve in a variety of ways. I think that the Seal of Excellence and some of the things like that were done under the ILI Institute. So there are a number of things that ILI can do. And one of those that came specifically through ESS was a desire to provide a mechanism for analyst enrichment. And this is, one of those things that everybody would like to have happen, and it's kind of hard to figure out how best to do it. So I'm going to talk about some of the efforts over the last year in providing analyst enrichment mechanisms and some of the things that we see as possibilities going forward. This has been a kind of crazy year, I'm sure, as everybody can agree. So I hope that I am not repeating too much information or leaving things out. So questions will be very valuable. So let's start with this then. What we have done for analyst enrichment to date is to look into a variety of webinars that could be presented. And we talked about presenting them for a low cost, just to cover expenses and to try to show their value. Sometimes when you provide something for free, people aren't always sure of its value. So there was a wonderful webinar done by Judy Morgan and David Friedman on the U.S. regulatory system, and that is now posted on our new website and is available for free, actually, as is the one on solid phase extraction fundamentals that David Friedman and I did. And Uric from EST provided a webcast on purge and trap fundamentals and optimization, and that one has been completed and is posted. And that one you have to go through the webcast software and provide your credit card. We're working on 2 other webcasts or webinars that have been in process for quite some time. So I have to say that I've been a little behind on following through on those, but William Lips has put together slides for analytical basics, which is, I think, an excellent presentation, and we're hoping to present that in late April of this year. And then Augustin Pieri has a vast amount of information on water analysis that he provides through a college course, which I think will be excellent. And that may turn into a series of 2 webinars, and that would be slated for late May. So those are things that we're doing at this point. Now, one of the things that came up along the way was that the Purge and Trap Fundamentals and Optimization webcast wasn't as highly attended as we would have thought. And we were puzzled whether this was because of the cost or whether it was because of some other reason. So the question was, why did this happen, and could we figure that out? So what we did next was work on a survey to try to find out what the membership thought about this. So the survey was conducted over March and April of last year. The solicitation for it was sent out twice, and we wanted to get, of course, as much representation from laboratories as possible so that we could know better what was going on. So let me just go back to that previous slide. This is the list of analyst enrichment webinars that are either completed or in process. And now, as I mentioned, we decided that it would be valuable to have newer input. So there was a survey done a few years ago, which had a wealth of information, but you never know when things are out of date. So it's always good to try again. So we did a survey, and this is just a piece of the data here, and I'll have some more on the next few slides. But what we wanted to do is to see how people felt, whether they agreed or disagreed with some of the statements that we were particularly concerned about in terms of continuing education units, the value of webinars, whether or not a payment of a small amount was going to be something that we would have to consider or not consider because of people's concerns. And it looked like, you know, particularly the small amount that we were asking people to pay was useful, and that webinars were of value. So this screen continues the questions that we were asking about whether we should deliver webinars that also had some basic market information and billing, IT, other business type of seminars in addition to the technical content. And people felt that would be useful. So that's another thing to consider. And then there was a question about whether our webinars should be part of a series, if we should have something that moves from, you know, surface level to greater depth, or whether we should allow, you know, single topic seminars that aren't going to be in depth, but cover just a small amount. And then we asked the question, of course, at the end, webinars are no longer effective format to relay training information, to see whether or not people would agree with that, and most people still a useful mechanism for relaying information. Then we asked about the particular topics, and this seminar, this survey was sent out to all of the different sections at ACIL because I thought there may be need in these other sections as well. And there was a lot of request for basic analytical instrument operation, water analysis topics, basic analytical skill. Basically, people were interested in a lot of things. There were a few things that didn't have much interest, for example, distillations. But, you know, it's pretty exciting to see that there was a fair amount of interest in all of these things. And interestingly enough, if you look at this, process improvement for the laboratory, that's an interesting topic. So that, you know, might be something to consider at some point in the future. So to summarize the survey, the sections were each represented in the survey. It seemed that more of the management folks were answering questions than chemists or technicians. 82% of the participants agreed it was valuable to receive a discount as a member of ACIL. So again, a membership value there. And most people agreed that paying a small amount for these webinars was acceptable. And interestingly enough, the statements asking about a series of webinars of increasing depth versus a single topic webinar, the response was about the same. So there didn't seem to be a clear preference for one way to do things. Basic instrument operation was a highly desired topic. There were other topics in that list that were desired, and there was strong support for providing some business-oriented webinars along with the scientific. So I felt that the survey provided some information to think about. So what is our plan? Complete the webinars that are currently in process. Focus on the next tier of topics of interest, including basic informational webinars on analytical techniques, and continue to entertain other topics for enrichment. Now, one of the other things that we were thinking about is a possible web page on acil.org to link to vendor information that might be useful. Just facilitate the search and to take better advantage of the information that's already available. I mean, the vendors have done a good job of putting information on their websites, and this might be a way to link it together so that people would have a place to look first off to find the things that would be of use to them. So I think that we've done a lot moving this forward. There's still certainly a lot that can be done, and I'm happy to entertain any questions if people have questions at this point. I've put you all to sleep.
Sorry, it's Kat Young. I was just gonna say, I think it would probably be good for the vendors to get with you and brainstorm on maybe the most efficient or effective way for us to be able to share our content. You know, maybe it makes sense to post some of those pieces of content, webinars for on demand, whatever, directly on your site, so you're not having, you know, so individuals have the best experience being able to access information. So, but maybe that could be a you know, separate meeting.
You know, Kat, that is
into
something that we
details.
did consider at the beginning, and Richard Bright spoke to a number of the vendor representatives about that. And the concerns came up that if you do that, then if the material is on our site, that certainly gives us the ability to control it and to keep it fresh. But the vendors don't necessarily get the clicks, they don't get the contact information, and they felt there was some concern that that might be a disadvantage for the vendors. So
Yeah, I talked to Richard about that as well, and I just,
Mhm.
you know, the whole lead form process is kind of, you know, cumbersome for people to have to necessarily provide their information every time. It's valuable, obviously, but maybe there's some assets that could stay on your site where we're not necessarily needing, you know, lead capture. Anyway,
that's a
like
good point.
we
That's a
could
good
talk
point.
offline about some things that could just reside on your site to, you know, give some, you know, basic information, and maybe, you know, other pieces could stay on our site and we just provide you the links. And I always worry about links breaking as well, and they're certainly not evergreen. So we've got to figure out a way to make sure that, like I said, the end user experience is a good one.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll set up a meeting for us to have a little talk about that. I
Okay,
agree
great.
about the broken link thing. I mean, that even happens on the ACIL site as well. You would think that you know, certainly the big vendors are going to have more of an issue because their sites are changing so rapidly. You know, it's easy to get broken links, but ACIL suffers from that as well. So that's a universal issue.
Yes, it
This
is.
is a
Okay, thanks.
this is a subject that you might want to consider discussing in session 3 on how ACIL can be more useful to our associate members and vendors and so on. That might be something to consider.
I agree. And it's also a session that David Kennedy will be participating in, talking about the vendor aspects. So,
Right.
sure.
Yep. So
Yeah, so
that's
I
the
have
one on the 30th, everybody.
Yeah, so Zoe, I have a real quick question. So when you're talking about the vendor information, I mean, I think it's a great idea, and I'm certainly intrigued by it. But the question I would have is that something that and you may not have given it this thought yet, would that be behind a login, or would that be for anybody who wants to come on the ACIL website? And the reason why I ask is because there's, from the standpoint of like the NELAC Institute, there's certain things that you can get to just as a somebody that's out there surfing the internet. And then if you want to get to other things, you have to log in as a member of the organization. Same thing with some of the accreditation bodies. They've got services that they provide to the public, and then they have services that they provide to members. So I'm just kind of curious about that. If there's been any thought given to that.
No, Judy, that's an excellent question, and I did not give that any thought. My thought was that the vendors that were represented would be ACIL members. I wasn't thinking about the other side of it, that our members would only have access. But you're right. I mean, some work was done to maybe pre-screen some of the links. So, that is possible that there's value in that we would want to protect.
Yeah, I just think about sometimes the amount of time that goes into a lot of the things that we do as an organization. I mean, at the end of the day, many of us are volunteers, and our time is a premium, and we do that, of course, to benefit ourselves, the organization, and the other members, because we're all trying to achieve the same thing. And I just wonder sometimes about how do we, what should we protect? How do we protect it? And what's reasonable. And when you benchmark or compare against other organizations, it just kind of that's the questions that kind of come up.
No, that's a good point. I was thinking that maybe we would want to run this as a test case and kind of see what kind of comments and feedback we got back. And we could then make a decision going forward how we would, what the final form would be. So I'll see over the next couple weeks if that's a possibility, and then we can, have a better idea of what it is to make a decision on that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All great information. Has anybody else got any questions or comments? I mean, okay, perfect. David Friedman, we had Augustin on the agenda as a presenter, but I'm not seeing where he's present. Did you have an update for the high priority methods?
The only one that I know that they were working on is 3050C. To my knowledge, there's no other activity going on. So, and I
Okay.
already updated everybody on where we stand on 3050C. So, unless, Zoe, do you know of anything else that ILI is doing in that regard? On other methods?
I don't.
The last time I talked to Richard about that, it looks like they don't have anything else going on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the efforts right now are things that are going on just as much at a national level as they would be anywhere else. I mean, things with PFAS, other methods, other ATPs that are underway, new technologies and products that are out. So, I mean, there's a lot going on out there. But from the standpoint of ILI, you're right. Our main one was 3050C, and that's because that was a direct involvement with the ORCR and that team. So. Okay, I just wanted to check and make sure before we jumped into state accreditation and other issues. So if there's nothing else you wanted to bring up, David, we'll just go ahead and move over to the state accreditations.
So Judy, this is William.
Hey, William.
Did Ms. Grosser mention that we're gonna the presentations that I promised to do for ILI like 4 years ago? We're gonna start that process up again. So I don't know.
Yes, you were on a slide.
Okay. I had something else I had to do for an hour, so I spared y'all the misery of me being here, but too late, too bad now. So
We'll move on to state accreditation and other issues in the T&I update. There's, from the standpoint of state accreditations, there's not a lot going out there, but there is a pretty big subject that we're all having to deal with at the moment. And I've been trying to get some good information back from the assessment community. But one of the things that we've dealt with for the past year and will continue to deal with for a period of time, and actually probably to a certain degree, possibly for the remainder of our careers, and that's virtual assessments. And I bring up virtual assessments because there has been some pretty widely different opinions of how well it works. And even with some of our best accreditors, or most well-known, should I say, most well-known and most traveled accreditors or assessors, they have differing opinions. I think for the most part, nobody thinks that it is a solution that is a solution by itself. That you can go the rest of your business days operating a laboratory or a business that has to be accredited and never have anybody step foot in your facility. But I do feel like that there has been a lot of experiences with virtual assessment that probably could benefit from some comments from some of the folks on the phone, if you wouldn't mind kind of giving some experiences with. And it's not just laboratory accreditations. This is everything from lab to supplier that seems to be affected by this. And we will talk a little bit more about supplier accreditation here in just a few minutes when we talk about the T&I update. But I kind of wanted to hear from some of the folks on the phone, if possible. Maybe Zanetta, if you have any insight on that, or Kim Ramsey, Brad, some of the laboratories, or even some of Cassie, some of the suppliers that have done, been through some of these virtual assessments, and kind of give, just a little bit of thought on your, what your thoughts are of it.
Yeah, Judy, hello, this is Janetta. Yes, I can say I also had the presentation at the TNI speaking for the benefits from the remote assessment. And really the biggest benefit, I should say, it was the cost. Laboratory really loved it because they saved a lot of money. And a lot of our assessments combined when we had the like a state assessment, assessment with the DOD or DOE assessments, those assessments usually take 8 days. And being 8 days on site, it's really cost for the laboratory travel for 2 assessors, because you can't have 1 assessor doing 8 days. So also the hotels, the food. So there's laboratory saved thousands of dollars. The other benefit was also we heard from our assessors was especially when they're witnessing. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I can hear you, but we're hearing some feedback.
Yeah, so the feedback from the responses from our assessors were, especially when doing the drinking water witnessing of the methods, was very beneficial for them, because a lot of them, they had like 2 screens computers, and on one screen they had the method on one side, and on the other side they witness the analyst who was performing the method. So can somebody like Lamb Walker and Kim Ramsey, can you mute yourself? Thank you. And so that was another benefit. They were able to witness the method, and they've told us that there was very much better witnessing remotely than being on the site. There were some areas they were not able to go and see when they're on site. So that was the second benefit. And then what was the third one was really they were able to manage better the assessment. Again, we don't prefer doing those remote assessments when we do reassessments, but for some reason they're beneficial when we do the surveillance assessments for our laboratories. Again, those are A and AB responses from our assessors and when we did our assessments to our laboratories. And I witnessed few of them, and I really think there were a lot of benefits from the remote assessment. Again, the future NAB, we are not going to continue doing the reassessments. Of course, we wanted to do on site, but for surveillance assessments, definitely it's a consideration. We're going to do remote assessments.
Zanetta, this is Brad Meadows. Question. You mentioned something about the auditors were able to make observations virtually that they could not otherwise do if they were going on site.
Right.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So there were areas that, I can tell you personally, because I witnessed a lot of those methods, a lot of those assessors who were witnessing the methods, and they had a person who was holding the iPad. This assessment was done with the iPad, and so it was directly directly where analyst was performing the method. And we were able to tell the person who was holding the iPad, can you please move, go closer, go left, go right, and see exactly where, we were able to see how he was, the pipette, how many milliliters he was pipetting. We were able to see, the tubes that he was using. And I mean, that was much better than me. And also, I can tell you, this was a state also assessment. Carl from Florida was there on the site. He was not able to come closer because he was supposed to be 6 feet apart, and he was not able to see this method. And this worked perfectly for us, because we were able to see everything on the screen. So I mean, again, it's a lot of benefits, a lot of good stuff, a lot of positive, a lot of negative stuff. So in this case, we were we were able to see better than being at the lab.
Okay, so that proximity issue was really, it was a matter of
Yes.
social distancing to where you couldn't be right up adjacent to the analyst.
Right, correct.
Okay, I understand.
Any other questions, somebody?
No, actually, Zanette, I do have one question. I mean, from the standpoint of the biggest drawback to doing the virtual assessment, what in your mind, what is the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge when we have a new technology to add to the scope of accreditation, like PFAS, we don't recommend the PFAS to be added virtually, remotely. We wanted to go on site because you wanted to feel, I mean, of course, looking at the LIMS system, it's okay, it's better remotely than being on site. But definitely when you go and have laboratory adding the new technology on the scope of accreditation, definitely that's a big no-no for us to do it remotely. We want it to be on site. If that's what your question was, Judy, I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood.
No. That is the question. I mean, I was curious as to what's the biggest challenge, and of course I can understand that new technology with all of the documentation and things that you need to see and you need to be there for. That makes perfect sense. Now that's actually exactly what I was looking for. And just one other question, if you don't mind me asking, do you find that the assessments take up more time or less time in order to get them, completed?
Yeah, definitely more time, Judy. Like a half day for sure, extra half day, or maybe 1 day extra. But again, compared to the cost that laboratory is gonna have when they have 2 assessors coming on site for paying for hotel and for the food and the travel expenses, definitely this will be paid off for 1 extra day.
Yep. Okay. Yep. And that's consistent with what I have heard from other accreditors at third-party assessors that are going out into the field, that are not going out into the field right now, and they're doing, all of their virtual, that it is taking more time. It's more time intensive from the standpoint of document review and such. So, yep, that seems to be what we're hearing.
Yeah, and we're adding additional time, maybe additional half day or extra day for the document review for our assessors. So like you said, it takes additional time, and some of the documents that we were not requesting before to be submitted prior to the assessment, now we assessors have the separate checklist that they're requesting from the laboratories prior to the assessment. Like, for example, the COA, Certified Reference Material, the certificates. Before, we were not requesting all the certificates to be submitted to us, but now, for depends of the test method that they're performing and which equipment they're using, usually assessor is requesting the certification for that reference material that they're using to verify calibration of that instrument. So those type of documents, records that were not requested before, now we wanted to see and review it before the assessment, and will save much time for the assessor and for the laboratory.
And one other question, I'm sorry. One of the things that I have heard as well out in the kind of in the marketplace is that some of the laboratories were not allowing on-site, and some of them were not allowing virtual. Can you speak to that? Did you experience some of the same things?
Yes, we did. And we requested special, we need something in signing form, something with their signature, something to something in writing from the laboratory, let us know that they will not allow us to come on site, and that's okay for us. ANAB still is not, we're not recommending on-site assessments. I mean, if the laboratory wants to, yes, with the special permission, special signature from them, we can go on site, but we need something in writing, definitely from the laboratory. And also now with the DOD and DOE, we need to go, and with the state also, still with Florida, we need to have approval from them. Florida is still allowing until end of June to have remote assessments, but with the DOD and DOE, we need confirmation from them if they can allow the assessment to have to be done remotely. If we have a new technology, like I said, that's a no. I mean, we are going on site for sure. But, or if the laboratory is not allowing us to come on site, then they have to wait for that new method to be added when they're ready for somebody to come on site.
Perfect. All good information. And part of the reason why I'm asking is because we've heard different things from from different places regarding the experiences that both laboratories and accreditors are having, and we just try to kind of keep a finger on the pulse, if you will, of what's going on out there. Because from the standpoint of like the NELAC Institute, and from our standpoint as a trade organization, we want to understand what's, how this is being handled in the marketplace, to understand if there's difficulties that laboratories are having in, with some of the accreditors or with the process, itself. Because I mean, even though we have complaint processes and appeal processes and things out there that gives us avenues to be able to kind of talk through or bring information forward, it's always good to kind of ask the question of those who are currently either conducting the assessments or participating in the assessments, so that we can understand if it's working. I mean, that's at the end of the day, I mean, nobody had a plan for this. There wasn't a strategy in place for it. So it has been a big disruption to a number of entities, and so it's important that we understand that it's successful, and it's not causing a lot of strife to the industry.
It is a successful, Judy. I mean, just what's going on with the pandemic now, this is the only option, and it's really, we've never had problems with any of the laboratories. They were all understandable, and same with the assessors.
Okay, great. Is there anybody on any of the labs or suppliers that have gone through these audits, or even EPA, that may have some thoughts on the feedback that they're hearing?
Hi, this is Kim Ramsey, and we went through a virtual assessment. We actually went through two. We went through one for new technology, where we did have to do a virtual assessment for new technology, and it was hard. It was really, really hard to get the data packet and then do an iPad presentation with every little thing that the analyst was working on. Then a couple weeks later, when they were supposed to try to come, they had to cancel again because Oregon's numbers went back up again. And so they did our annual assessment, or biannual, and actually we were 3 years past due. So they did our assessment, and we're accredited for Safe Drinking Water Act, Clean Water Act, and the RCRA program. So we had to do the full assessment, which normally takes a week and 4 assessors. It took 3 weeks, and we had 3 assessors, and it was horrible. It was grueling. One of my analysts said she thought she got a root canal because they actually had more time to go through our SOPs and more time to go through every little data packet that we sent them, where normally we just hand them a binder and they go through it. But they found things in our SOPs like typos that had been in there since, I don't know, back in the beginning of T&I, which is fine. I mean, it makes us a better laboratory, but it was long, it was tiring, it was exhausting, and it wasn't cheaper. I paid $1,000 for a travel fee, and I was told we're not going to get refunded for it. So we're not saving a dime. We paid the exact same amount, but we had a lot more employee time because instead of being 4 days, it was 3 weeks. And so I absolutely disagree with the fact that it's cheaper for laboratories, because it was so much more costly for laboratories. And having 3 assessors, we had 3 different iPads, and I had to have another employee holding an iPad for another employee. So we had all 3 managers, myself and our quality assurance officer and our lab director, holding iPads with our analysts. Where normally the assessors are dedicated to the analysts, and we could stand by if we want to, but we didn't. In this case, we had to. So I don't want to see another one, but Oregon, we on the ORLAP committee, I'm on the OTAC, Oregon ORLAP Technical Advisory Committee, and we just passed a new rule that they can continue their assessments should the governor claim any kind of incident. So there's my 2 cents.
Wow. That gives a different perspective, which is kind of what I figured I would hear would be, a couple of different perspectives on this, because as you've already mentioned, it does give them more time. And it is one of the things that some of the assessors have actually said, that they have more time to look at the documents. Because I mean, the reality is when you're in the laboratory and you're assessing a lab, even if you are sitting down and being the one doing the documents, you are taking time to switch from one subject to the next. You might get up, you might move over here, you might go to a different place. To whereas if you have it all at your, at your fingertips doing this remote, you are spending more time on it. Of course, I don't know that I would be looking at somebody's grammar or looking for typos in their SOPs. However, but I would think from the standpoint of the technical, it would give you more time there. But that's almost a little disturbing to hear what you're saying about it being so much more labor intensive. Not that I wouldn't have expected that, but I can see what you're saying. I mean, it's no different than somebody doing somebody else video, and I mean, it involves 2 people where it might not have, well, it definitely would not have before. So anyway, so thank you, Kim, for that. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Anybody got any questions for Kim? Okay, Brad, it looks like you had
Yeah, I was just going to chime in just a little bit. We had a surveillance audit, I believe through by ANAB actually, for our DoD accreditation for PFAS. So we did the initial assessment on site, and then a year later coincided obviously with last year. So we did have we had the virtual audit with the auditor. To the best of my knowledge and what I heard back, that it actually went fairly smoothly, and it was as in depth as you could reasonably be. Once again, it was a single method for the most part, single technology, and so that made it, I think, pretty straightforward for us. I didn't hear of any horror stories, and I certainly didn't. I would say that we didn't necessarily experience what Kim is describing, but I can certainly imagine on an initial assessment where you have 2, 3, 4 auditors. going through things at at that level of detail, that yeah, it could certainly get extended out, and it seems like it would be very easy for it to, I think, maybe stretch beyond the norms of what you would normally experience. Where it's much in the virtual world. I do more meetings now than I ever have, simply because it's really convenient to do meetings. When there's a finite beginning and an end, and they're going to be on site 4 days, and there's travel involved and so forth, there's some pretty hard cutoffs. And so I can see where the virtual audit could get extended out because, oh, we didn't get a chance to look at something, let's go back and do that. I can see where that has that potential. I think from my perspective, the one thing that I would question, or that I see some downside to, is it's during the course of an audit, at least, anytime that I've certainly walked through to audit a process, it's not always, about what you're witnessing right there in front of you. It's some of that sort of peripheral knowledge, if you will, that you gain by kind of observing what's going on around, and you don't necessarily may not get the benefit of that as an auditor, going in and not being able to kind of see, you're only seeing what's being presented to you in front of that iPad, and your ability to kind of look around and see, other things going on around you, I think is maybe a little bit missing there too. So I think, when we finally get through this thing and we get a chance to sort of post-mortem it, I definitely see an NEMC presentation looking at the statistics of findings during the COVID period versus the non-COVID period. It would be interesting to see, did the average number of audit findings go up? Did it go down? Is it one and the same? Be kind of an interesting review when this is all said and done.
Thanks,
Hello.
Brad. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective on that, from the standpoint of looking at the statistics of the findings. I agree with you. I think we'll find, it's interesting, and I know, Zanetta, you wanted to say something, so hang on just one second. But it is interesting for a good number of years, and I know several of you that are on the phone have seen this presentation. Several of us have given the top 10 deficiencies, if you will, and that information gets compiled from all of the ILAC signatory accreditors, as well as a number of the state agencies and some of the third-party assessors that are out there. We bring it all together, we do a top 10, and that top 10 might have shuffled around as to which one's 1 and which one's 10 over the years, but it's pretty much, the list itself has pretty much stayed the same. It'll be interesting to see if there was improvement to that list from the standpoint of maybe some of those more key items falling off versus what might be new on the list because a different perspective was brought to it. So I agree with you. I'm hoping that will be an NEMC presentation in that regard, and I'm hoping to see a large comparison of data. So I'm going to stop there, and Zanetta, I'll let you comment.
No problem, Judy. I just wanted to say to Kim, I apologize. I'm so sorry, Kim. It sounds like a very bad experience, and also depends which accreditation body who did it. Because I can tell you, for all our assessments, all environmental laboratories, I witnessed almost all of them, not 100%, but almost all. And our assessors, we have like a checklist for the laboratory and for the assessors to prepare prior to the assessment, to have like a strategy or plan how to do this assessment, to prepare the laboratories for the test methods, check the area, which area they have the good internet connection. If there's no good internet connection, the bandwidth and stuff like that. So that's also, laboratory has to work on it, either perform the method, at the place where the connection is better. So that's why we did not have those horror stories. Again, I'm so sorry. It sounds, like you guys went through a lot. Again, I'm sorry for that.
It's fine. We were actually ORLAP's first full assessment that they had ever done. They had done some very small ones with cannabis laboratories. So we were their first one and kind of their guinea pig. I'm also on their advisory committee, so I feel like that they felt that they could use our laboratory as their guinea pig, and so I'm okay with it. I'm actually good friends with the assessors, so I don't want to make it sound like it was a bad thing. They're you know, they did a really professional job. They did do a good job. And at the end, we will be a better laboratory, which is always the goal. It was just time consuming, and honestly, it wears you out just standing there with an iPad for 8 hours with your employees running around and, you know, going from one employee to the other, and the breaks were minimal. And then we also have our regular work, but 3 weeks is a little excessive. I mean, it was actually like 2.5 weeks, but it's pretty excessive when you're not expecting that. And so, you know, they're going to get better at it. They'll kind of narrow it down. We did have some issues where they wanted us to do have 2 different assessments with 2 different employees at the same time, but they're in the same lab, you know, so it's like the alkalinity and the solids at the same time. Well, those are all in the wet chem lab. And so there was no possible way that could happen. So we had to kind of, you know, rearrange their schedules and try to educate them. And in the end, it's fine, but I don't want to do it again. That's for sure.
All right. Well, good discussion. Any comments from anybody else or any questions for anything that's been brought up? Okay, super. So for the T&I update, you know, there's always a lot going on with T&I. And so I talked to Jerry Parr and I asked him, you know, if you wanted to inform people about the things that are going on in T&I, what would you like to hear, you know, what would you like them to hear? So one of the things that he brought up is he brought up the white paper. And this paper was written, it was written last year. The advocacy committee, as well as the T&I board and a number of other committee groups inside T&I actually brought this together. It's called Laboratory Accreditation Makes a Difference, and it's on the value of accreditation. And one of the things that this document did is that they recoined a phrase for T&I and basically said it's data that you can rely on. And so the final version of it came out on October 14th of 2020, which happened to be my birthday, so I was super excited. But anyway, so it came out on October 14th, and a couple presentations have been done. I think that there will probably be another one at NEMC. But what they did is they brought together a lot of information that they had collected. One was from the survey that was done a long time ago that I actually did in 2012. That information was actually referenced as part of this document. And basically it's just the surveying of the laboratories and understanding how the community has changed and improved, and data analysis and laboratory operations and things have improved because of accreditation. But the thing that they put a lot of time on was talking about this data that you can rely on. So if you're going to have a tagline for an organization, I kind of feel like this is where T&I has moved to, because the idea of the data that you can rely on is that the reported result is a good measure and is of the true concentration. The result is of known and documented quality, which, if you recall, known and documented quality, data of known and documented quality has been kind of the thing that's been said for a good number of years as part of the NELAC program and as part of T&I, and that's what the standard is designed to actually result in, is that data of known and documented quality, and now data that you can rely on. But it also speaks to that the laboratory has complied with the mandated method requirements, has a strong quality management system that ensures confidence, meets the customer expectations and requirements, and then of course that the accreditation to the standard itself improves laboratory performance. So in summary, basically what it means is that, you know, data results can be reconstructed and that sufficient documentation is collected and recorded in order to be able to do that, and that the reference materials, standards, and reagents are all traceable, which is something we'll talk about in a minute, because there's an actual new group that, if you see on the screen, it says Consumables Task Force. That actually speaks to that. Competency of the analyst is demonstrated by training records, PT results, and demonstrations of capability. Also another concerted effort that's going on right now. The other guarantee that's expected is that samples are handled correctly and can be traced from receipt to reported result, and that quality control results in document data quality, and that the data itself meets certain standards for admissibility or legal defensibility, if you will, and that the result is reported correctly and meets requirements relating to quantitation limits and acceptable data flagging, and that flagging actually occurs because it is accepted as part of the data and what the data means and represents, and that the requested methodology was followed in generating the data. So there's a lot of things that the white paper was set out to address and represent. And so TNI will continue forward in the vein of what's been spoken about in the white paper, and to pursue more opportunities to understand nonconformances, laboratory improvements, ABs, and how ABs help laboratories to identify and correct problems. And then as we move forward with the standard, keep the standard representative of those things and make sure that it reflects and stays current with laboratory practices and technologies. So so a lot of good stuff going on with that particular effort. And if you haven't had the opportunity to read the white paper, it's not super long. I think it's 7 pages. Take a moment, go out to the TNI website and look at it. So as part of this white paper and in the development of it, some new groups were formed. And just to kind of frame up what do you mean by new groups? TNI has committees right now. They have expert committees and executive committees. Expert committees, of course, work on specific parts of the standard. Executive committees have oversight and make decisions based on that information. So you have a PT expert committee and a PT executive committee. So one drives program and the other one drives the information that comes into the program. But we have some new groups because there's been some strife over the years on competency, on the technical manager. And one of the divides has been between what the expectation is by the state agency for what a technical manager is, what actually qualifies for that role in the TNI standard. And so, previous history with the drinking water program and other compliance programs, there were definitions for these roles that we tried to bring together into the standard. And what has happened is that over the years, it's really created a lot of decision points. And so ideally, this competency task force, what they're actually working on right now is these particular items. And so that they have a big discussion going on within this group to understand technical managers and what kind of experience they need versus what type of qualifications a business manager might need. So it's basically operational versus technical oversight. That managers do not need a technical background necessarily, but it's all been lumped into one category. So this competency task force will actually be one that will hopefully iron this out, because it has been a very contentious discussion over the years. The next one is the consumables task force, and this as I stepped down after 8 years as the LASEC chair, I stepped into the role of consumables task force because it's something that we identified as a larger executive committee, that this was kind of a gap in the standard or in the expectations of the standard. So the goal of this consumables task force is to understand critical consumables and supplies and what is truly needed from a documentation perspective. So we're actually supporting the standard itself in the requirement for the purchased services, supplies, reagents, and consumables that directly impact the quality of test or calibrations. And we got a couple of folks on the phone here today. William Lips is one of them that's actually on this committee with me. And Patsy Root is also on there. And what we've done is we've gone through as a committee and we're exploring the feasibility of the need for implementation guidance and potentially a standard for laboratory consumables. And the goal is to provide accuracy and consistency into how we look at these services that we procure and how we look at how our supplies meet the qualifications for the methods and the compliance programs that we're all involved in. And so it's not specific necessarily to a full service laboratory. It absolutely is speaking to all of the activities in the laboratory that require some type of traceability to a known reagent, standard, source, service, whatever. But what we found, and this is what Jerry and I talked about, is that this has kind of morphed into something a lot bigger than what we originally thought it would be, and that we have identified all of these sources that everybody talks about in a large crowd, says, oh yeah, we do that because we have to. Well, then when somebody says, well, you have to, okay, so why do you have to? Well, because there's a requirement for it. Well, okay, so there's a requirement for it. Whose requirement is it? And then everybody goes silent, and they're like, oh, well, you know, we're not really sure where that comes from. Well, this document we're finding is going to identify a lot of that, because it's going to take us down the path of ASTM, NIST, and all of these other organizations that have had a hand in defining why we have Class A volumetric wear, why we have certain tolerance standards for certain classes of weights, why certain types of equipment has to meet these requirements, but not these over here. So it's really going to turn out to be quite the resource for laboratories. So it's taken longer than we originally thought, but it's going to move along really nice once we get over just this one part where we're trying to get everything identified. So great effort. It's gonna be a really useful product that they come out with. So the next thing is the mentor committee. Jacob Oaxaca from California is actually chairing that. That committee is set up for new labs, small labs, laboratories that need some additional contacts and folks to help them understand some of the more intricate parts of the standard and of the process. And so this committee is setting up setting that network up, setting up that capability. And then of course the training committee is chaired by Callista Daigle, and she is that committee itself is to develop and maintain a comprehensive training plan for T&I. And I don't know how many of you remember, but some time back there was what was called a technical assistance committee, and that kind of got dissolved or absorbed into a reorganization of the T&I committees some time back. And in the reorganization, while training was still important, there wasn't a central hub for it. And I think this training committee the goal is for them to bring that back, because at the end of the day, T&I is providing a lot of training opportunities for laboratories and others to attend. And so this committee is going to help organize that. So the next part of what's going on with T&I is the NEMC, which will be in Washington State this year, will be on site and virtual. It will be a combination. It's interesting. They started on this very early in the process to get people to say, yes, I'll be there in person. No, I will not. And then of course you'll have that group of people that won't know until right before the meeting for sure whether or not they're going to be able to go. But right now they have 300 plus folks committed to attend on site. And that's actually a very big number, and it's almost bigger than well, I know it's bigger than what they actually thought, and we were kind of laughing about it, because years ago getting 300 people to attend the NELAC meeting was kind of common, and now this is actually half. So what we're seeing for T&I NEMC now is usually well up over 600, approaching 700 folks. And so we're looking at possibly getting half on site committed for this year. There is 78 of the speakers that intend to be on site for the meeting. And right now they have accepted 148 abstracts. And so interestingly enough, with the abstracts, and as one of the committee chairs for operational issues, what we're seeing is we're seeing certain types of abstracts, large amounts of them, so we're having to kind of reshuffle some of the abstracts among some of the sessions. So, and in all fairness, not all abstracts are submitted to the appropriate section from the beginning. So sometimes something will come in, and I mean, if it's the difference between a cat and a dog, and they submit it to the dog section and it's a cat, you go, oh, I got to move that over to the cat. So same thing here, we'll get something in, it won't be necessarily appropriate for that particular section, and so we have to move it. So I think we have several that are full. I don't know that we have any that haven't received at least one, if not two, abstracts. So it's looking very good for the year, for the actual meeting. The last thing that we thought was kind of important to talk about is the PT program. And as mentioned earlier, there is a PT executive committee that basically they handle the FOPT tables, they handle the actual PT program, the analytes, the criteria and all of that. And then there's a PT expert committee who handles the standard, if you will. So anything that's in the standard when it comes to time frame, number of PTs, programs, this, that, and the other, that's in the standard. So it's the executive committee that's working on this. And so they're working on PTs for the drinking water program for PFAS. And so not really sure exactly where they're at with it right now. That is their active activity. And I think it's important because, again, with PFAS, that seems to be, of course, one of the more hot topics going on right now. And then in addition to that, they are looking into an air PT program, and that's in discussion. I don't know that they really have made a lot of progress on that, but they're trying to determine what it should look like. So laboratories do an air analysis that currently doesn't have, quote unquote, access to a formal PT program. The idea would be to provide that. And so, I mean, I'm sure it's like everything else. It's a day or two away, but it will be coming. It will be coming down the pike pretty soon. So I'm going to stop there. This took way longer than I thought it was going to take. We're 15 minutes from our break. But I want to stop there and take some questions if there are any on the T&I program and what's going on with the committees. And of course, I mean, in any other topic you want to ask a question about, I just won't guarantee that I have an answer.
Judy, this is Dave. Just a quick question. Have they reached out to the EPA's OAQPS? Because they used to run an air PT program for many years. I remember they used to send out cylinders of gas and stuff like that, gas mixtures for laboratories to use, sampling analysis.
Yeah, I know that there has been conversations in the past on that, because I think there was some question on the continuance of that program and how it applies and other discussion around it. I don't know the details, but I'll certainly make a note to make sure that they have done that. But I feel certain that they have.
Okay.
Anybody else got any questions? Everybody must be hungry. I'm not just kidding. Our congressional update with Mike Oscar. I'm going to give you the floor because you're next up to give us a congressional update.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon on not what is happening at the Congress and where we see things maybe proceeding. I'll be relatively brief, as I mentioned before. Congress continues to be closed to the general public, and that closure has been heightened by the activities that occurred on January 6th. And despite the halls of Congress being closed due to COVID-19, and with the security measures now in place, and actually those security measures along with the fencing with barbed wire will remain in place until May of 23rd. There's still National Guard troops present. They will reduce that number from 5,500 to 2,600. I believe it was Senator Durbin that said the place looks like Kabul, and Senator McConnell says it looks like we're in a battle in Afghanistan. And it's very unfortunate. I hope cooler heads will prevail, and security measures will be put in place so those fencing apparatuses can be removed. So it has been challenging, but I will tell you that despite that, I've never been busier, and I don't say that with any sense of hyperbole. It has been nonstop, and the amount of information that has been pumped out, both from the administration and from Congress, has been unending. And we did pass the COVID-19 package. I do encourage all of you. I don't want to go through that now. There's a lot in it. But I do want to mention that if you haven't visited the ACIL website, please do, because I put not only the nuts and bolts to the American Rescue Package that was passed last week, $1.9 trillion. A lot of those provisions that we discussed on the business practices call are addressed in that, dealing with small business issues, dealing with unemployment extension benefits, dealing with the pension protection program, tax credits, child care, to pension relief, to testing and vaccines, etc., were addressed. I do want to highlight, though, and I want to compliment ACIL for being at the forefront on this, because if you recall, not so much in this section, but in the food section, we, and I know there's some cross-pollination of members of that section and this section, so I'm pretty comfortable highlighting it, but we did a survey on pipettes and to see what the uses are, because there is a grave concern of whether or not we're going to run out of supply. And a part of the package that was passed last week, that is the COVID relief package, it has $48.7 billion set aside for testing and contact tracing under the existing law. And it's likely to go towards domestic production of pipette tips and other supplies that have been difficult to get during the pandemic. But even with the extra funds, there's still a limited number of companies that have the experience or expertise and capacity to make these products. And demand is very high for pipette tips, as you well know, and plastic wells. And pipettes and micropipettes are on the Food and Drug FDA's device shortage list. And I mention that because when FDA reached out to us, we surveyed our members because they knew this shortage was not only clear and present, but it would be ongoing, and we responded in kind. The cash for testing and contract tracing will boost earlier investments, but they announced as of February 17th, that is, the Biden administration is set to have $650 million toward testing in schools and $815 million towards domestic manufacturing of testing supplies. But many of these pipettes are proprietary, and only a handful of companies are able to produce them, which exacerbates the shortage. And high regulatory expectations are also put onto these products. So therefore, what does that production look like? And so we'll be reaching back out to FDA to see what the status is and to see whether or not ACIL can be helpful in that regard. But it is a direct consequence of our continued discussions with the FDA, our continued discussions with all agencies throughout this pandemic. But I thought that that was a relatively timely piece of information. The other thing, too, that I just want to mention, that I know the discussion on PFAS has continued to come up. Right now, Congress is taking all of their requests for the upcoming defense annual bill, authorization bill. So we'll know better as those requests start to come in and see how the bill crafts and deals with PFAS. But I don't have anything further, and I know you'll be addressing that with USGS coming up to visit in due course along with DOD. So I don't want to spend time on that today in my remarks. The next big package that Congress will be dealing with will be immigration and also infrastructure. So we'll navigate those accordingly, not as they matriculate through the process. But it is a very interesting time. Unfortunately, we will not have our Independence Day on the Hill this year due to circumstances beyond our control. but I do suspect that we will have some virtual meetings upcoming in the months ahead, and perhaps we will have a smaller kind of hybrid Independence Day in the fall, depending on how our issues are being dealt with in Congress and what we need to address at that time, specifically within this environmental section. So with that, we'll just we're taking a wait and see approach. Having talked with staff, and I've talked to a lot of staff, they're not necessarily happy with the Zoom meetings or virtual meetings, but they're the flavor of the week, and we're navigating them accordingly. But I wouldn't call for a virtual meeting with the staffer, at least my recommendation on behalf of ACIL, unless I thought it was relatively important and timely, because as I said, these virtual meetings are candidly frowned upon by staff, and so we want to handle that appropriately. We don't want to make any enemies unnecessarily. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I'll open up for any comments, questions, or concerns. But right now, we're watching everything as it kind of comes to fruition. So Judy, David, if you have any questions, anybody in the group has any questions, but I do encourage everyone to please go on the website. It is a very long document that I placed on the document. It's about 49 pages, and I did that for a reason on the COVID relief package, because I wanted to give you from from beginning to end. It's chock full of nuts of everything that went in there, all the explanations from the House side and the Senate side, what it was signed by the president, because I believe that this is the 6th COVID package to pass the Congress, and I think it will be the last one. I don't think we're going to have another one. There will be an infrastructure package. I don't know necessarily if it will pass. I think there will be some provisions that deal with the pandemic, but I do believe that this will be the last bill that we'll see as we continue to roll out these vaccinations. So that's why I wanted to ensure that our association had, a comprehensive overview of what the bill looked like, but I do not anticipate us getting another one passed, especially not within the next couple of months as we roll out the vaccines and get people back into the workplace, et cetera, and get our economy back up and running.
Okay, so Mike, I have a question real quick. Can you
Yes, ma'am.
elaborate or explain a little bit what you mean by an infrastructure package? I mean, what does that look like? I'm not sure what that necessarily refers to.
Okay, so that is, thank you, Judy. To be more specific, we have the surface transportation and water transportation. Both bills are due up for reauthorization come September 30th of this year. And what they've done previously, especially because of COVID last year, is they just extended those current bills by 1 year. So there is great expectation and anticipation, both in the House and in the Senate, that there may be a larger infrastructure package to be passed, dealing with both highways and waterways. Where I think this section has a big influence there is in both bills dealing with the environmental consequences, because in both bills there's an environmental studies that are needed for certain projects to move forward that can delay projects. What are the consequences? What is the impact going to be, not only on the environment but on the overall project moving forward? And also, what are some of the safety concerns that might be impacted by that infrastructure project moving forward? So I've been in a series of meetings, and actually I have a couple more later this afternoon than tomorrow, dealing with the EPW committee. If you remember, we met with the EPW committee on some of these provisions. That's the Environment and Public Works Committee, dealing with the PFAS legislation 2 years ago. I'm specifically working with the members on the subcommittee dealing with transportation infrastructure, but there is an expectation that the president, along with his administration, with Secretary Buttigieg, who is our transportation secretary, to look at a $4 trillion infrastructure package. I don't necessarily believe all of that will get passed, but I do believe that something will get through on the House side. The big issue will be on the Senate side, because not all of the infrastructure funding will fall within jurisdiction under the reconciliation process. And one of the reasons they were able to get the COVID package passed, which no Republicans voted for in the House and Senate, it was primarily just passed by the Democratic Party, but they were able to do that because under budget reconciliation, all you have to do is to get to majority, 50+1, and with the vice president being Democrat, that's how they were able to do it. On the infrastructure, on both of these bills, both surface and on water, there are projects in there, or there are, issues in there that will not be considered germane to those bills under budget reconciliation, because typically under budget reconciliation, these programs that are funded are mandatory funding. And if you try to put in new programs, or if you put in programs where you start to tweak language and you start offering legislative fixes that aren't considered budgetary, then you can't, they will not be considered germane, thereby they will not be able to go through budget reconciliation. So knowing that, and knowing that they're going to have to bring over, in order to avoid a filibuster, you got to bring over 10 Republicans, because you have to get to a 60 vote threshold in the Senate. And so knowing that's happening, and how do we get Republicans over, and how do we lower the cost, and how do we figure out the pay for, and there will be user fees for this. There will also be huge infrastructure, not only for transportation, waterways, but also for broadband, for alternative energies such as solar and natural gas, and anything beyond fossil fuels, for batteries, etc., and lithium, and the development of all that. But in order for that to happen, they have to bring over Republicans to entice them to consider whether or not they're going to do this. And if you don't, if beyond user fees, and if you're not going to raise the federal gas tax, which the president doesn't want to do, then how do you pay for it? So one of the ways they're doing that is they've decided, both in the House and Senate, on the Democratic side, is to bring back earmarks, which have been banned for the last 10 years. Earmarks are special projects. You probably heard about it in the press, but they're special projects that are congressionally selected by members of Congress to help out, for projects to move forward. And they're often used in horse trading, and specifically in transportation. They're used a lot. Like, for example, you can get an earmark to get maybe an additional bridge built, or you could have an intermodal facility for a transit stop that has multiple parking lot, etc. And a lot of times members of Congress are willing to turn a blind eye to the larger portions of the bill if they can get some pork to bring home back to their district. The Republicans have not agreed to that in their caucus, but the Democrats are going to proceed, and they're taking earmark requests right now, in addition to the regular requests that are a part of these bills, and most of them are due in by April 15th. So we'll see how this plays out. I think there is great willingness to do an infrastructure package for both of these bills, but time will tell. And I think it'll pass easily in the House, but it's the Senate that's really going to be the question mark of how this proceeds and what the next steps will be. And again, do we get something done by September 30th in advance of the deadline? Does that work? And there's more to it, but I've just given you an overview right now. And I've been tracking it. I'm tracking it not only for this section, but I'm also tracking it specifically for the CMET section.
No, that's helpful. I appreciate that extra explanation. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on that particular topic?
Hey Mike, this is Tarun. I just had a quick question on if you're hearing anything on, some of the the reversal of the deregulation and the changes of the, in the waters of the United States Act and stuff. These were kind of vaguely mentioned in the first 100-day plan, but have you heard anything about them since?
Well, first off, good to talk with you again, Tehran. And right now, in the last two administrations, whether it was the Obama administration or the Trump administration, they had the WOTUS rule, the waters of the USA. And it went back and forth. Obviously, when the Obama administration was in office, and I say obviously because it was, it was more environmental concerns were brought into that rule. On the Trump administration, a lot of lawsuits came into place because they thought the rule went too far in terms of what was considered navigable water, also what was considered a U.S. navigable waterway and the definition of that. And there was lawsuits, roughly about 16 throughout the country, to prevent that rule from moving forward. The Biden administration is going to have to rewrite that rule, but there has been no discussion yet of what that will look like, that rule. So we're standing by to figure that out. And I will keep you updated as I know more. And the EPW committee is anticipating that rule to come forward. The biggest problem with that rule right now, whether we agree with it or disagree with it or we draft it, all of that, it really comes down to we've got to get the agencies filled. Their nominations of the various, not only secretaries, but undersecretaries that have direct jurisdiction on that rule have to be appointed, and those appointments are still happening. So we don't have anything concrete yet of what the Biden administration. We have innuendo, we have suggestions, conjecture, but I don't have anything tangible yet to make what their thoughts will be.
All right.
Well, I'll remain on, Judy. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, so we're gonna jump into our next topic. We're a little bit early. I'm getting on our next topic by about 10 minutes, but we have really kind of a couple of things that we wanted to, even though this says a PFAS update, there's actually a couple of things that kind of fits in the timing of this. So I'm gonna let David start out with this, just simply because that we've got an effort going on with that's actually with PFAS right now with UCMR 5, and if you're not familiar with what that means, that is the it's the contaminant monitoring rule. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I'd say the
Unregulated.
uncontrolled monitoring rule, I think it is.
Yeah.
I forget what the C means. Contaminant monitoring rule.
It's yeah. Go ahead.
All right. Well, EPA just recently put out a proposed, this was on March 11th, a proposal for UCMR 5 study. And they included 29 PFAS compounds that they're proposing that would have to be analyzed in drinking water. Now, the concern that people have raised in ACIL is that this is only a tiny subset, as everybody knows, like less than 1% of the known PFAS compounds that are in commerce. And it's likely that given their properties, a vast majority are going to present similar environmental and public health hazards as the 29 compounds that were proposed for the study. And the position that ACIL is looking at is that's been brought to my attention is that limiting the study to only these 29 compounds is going to give a false measure of environmental contamination and also of the risk to public health. So ACIL is thinking of looking at testifying at the public hearing, one of the two public hearings that EPA is scheduling for the UCMR program. And I'm not sure everybody is aware of it, but in the Safe Drinking Water Act, in Section 1445, requires EPA every 5 years to do one of these studies. But it puts a limitation of only 30 analytes can be in a particular study. So they can't have more than 30 unregulated contaminants in a particular study. Now, it turns out, and I wasn't aware of it before, but I just found out that last year in the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018 relaxed that prohibition for PFAS compounds. So that is not a barrier for including more compounds. What is a barrier is that there has to be validated, there has to be drinking water method that's been validated if it is to be used in this program. So the lack of appropriate analytical methodology, EPA is stating, is the reason for this limitation. Now, we also feel that even without that relaxation of the 30 compound limit on a study, that EPA has been able to get around that in the past. For example, where they've looked at classes of compound like PCBs, which are, as everybody knows, a given PCB is made up of many particular compounds. And even recently in UCMR4, the brominated acids. So EPA, ACIL members feel, or at least the ones that have contacted me about this, feel that the original list, because EPA back in October, I think it was, of 2020, had proposed a more extensive list of compounds to be monitored for in the study, in this UCMR5. And we feel that these additional compounds should be added back in. In order for us to develop testimony for this, a number of issues are going to have to be addressed by ESS. What additional PFAS analytes do we believe should be included in UCMR5 in addition to the 29 that EPAs can be analyzed by 533 and 537.1? And if so, what methodology do we feel has been sufficiently validated that EPA can use? Or if it's not been sufficiently validated, what mechanism do we feel EPA should use in order to quickly validate whatever method we think is appropriate? Also, what levels of sensitivity, what's the low measurement limit we feel would be appropriate on this? Another issue we have to deal with is the analytical standards. Are appropriate analytical standards available, or can these be quickly made available for this study? So that's a quick nutshell of an issue that ESS is going to be working on, and we wanted to bring it to everybody's attention. And we're going to have to probably set up some kind of little task group to deal with this, because we don't have another regular ESS meeting until late in April, and we need to get our comments in fairly soon. Probably around sometime in May, we'll need to get our comments in. So questions, comments? I've run through that pretty quick.
I actually have a comment. So in our commenting efforts, and I know we've done this in the past. I just don't know what the plan is for this particular circumstance. I'm assuming that we're going to reach out to some of our other organizations and understand what their position is and whether or not they're planning to respond. I mean, normally we know if like TNI is going to respond, or WEF, or one of the other water organizations. So I would like to see us, if we weren't planning to, I would like to see us plan to reach out to them and see where they're at with this as well. More or less a comment that we can figure out how we're going to accomplish it.
The people support ACIL going forward with this? Does
So,
ESS
Judy,
feel-
this is, sorry, Dave. AWWA will be responding, and I think I sent you the contact information, Chris Moody.
Yes, I have that.
Okay, so yeah, the AWWA will respond. There was concern about the, the same thing, the same concern with zero analytes other than PFAS, but they want to add the disinfection byproducts, the nitrogen containing disinfection byproducts. There's a question of why lithium even matters, because it's given as a medicine to people. So, but anyway, so that's one organization you can reach out to.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the reminder on that. Yeah, that does bring up a good point, and I think a lot of people will understand, where I'm going with this. I mean, I do agree with that on, with William on lithium, unless it's the fact that they had 29 analytes under PFAS and they needed, they could only allow one more under the rule that David read, to make it 30. But we also can maintain that, haloacetic acids under the HAA5 rule is counted as one thing, but it's actually 5 compounds: bromoacetic acid, chloroacetic acid, and so on and so forth under the HAAs. So I think we can make a really good point from the standpoint of how many methods they've actually cut out of this. But I mean, and my criticism, just from where I sit, I mean, I truly believe that Legionella and some of those on the micro side should have made this list. So a lot of different opinions here, I'm sure, but we certainly want to make our voice be heard on the concerns, especially for the laboratories that have been so supportive of UCMR for over the years, as geared up for it, brought the technology online, validated new methods that weren't common to any other program, and so on and so forth, and that have kept their eye on this and actually went ahead and purchased equipment and has prepared for it, only to find out that they were going to significantly shorten the methodology list, as well as the monitoring compounds. So there's a lot of concerns that this is raising, and we've just got to make sure that we focus our attention on the things that matter the most to the section, and make sure that we're in line with our stakeholder groups that we work with, like AWWA. And if we're not in line with them, understand why we're different. Doesn't mean it's going to change our mind, and it certainly doesn't mean it'll change theirs. But if we have some differences, we might have an opportunity to understand a different perspective. Although I'm pretty hard-headed, and I know how I think it should be, so probably won't change my mind, but I will definitely acquiesce to what the section wants and needs. So anyway, I didn't mean to hijack that conversation, so I'll stop there. Does anybody else have any comments on this particular issue with the response to the proposal, or the proposed rules? I'm sorry.
Okay, another issue that has recently surfaced is one that deals with data suitability and data usefulness disagreements. Every so often, a difference of scientific opinion arises, basically, between a laboratory that's doing some work for the government, environmental sampling analysis, and the government data reviewers on, is a particular set of data suitable that's generated by the laboratory? Does it meet the requirements of the contract? Currently, there seems to be no good pathway for a laboratory to directly appeal a data reviewer's decision. These are decisions that are based on the review's interpretation of the Quality Assurance Project Plan or the QSM for the DoD, DOE, but that interpretation can be very different from that which the laboratory and other professional data reviewers feel. And in instances where this happens, the laboratory doesn't really have a good recourse to challenge the review's interpretation. Since it's only a prime contractor, as I understand it, that has the ability to go to the data reviewer or the government contracting officer and challenges. And prime contractors generally don't have that expertise or that incentive to challenge. So basically the question is, so this such a situation leads to laboratories having to do corrective actions like resampling, re-extraction and analyzing samples, recalculation results, and so based on a reviewer's interpretation without it being able to be adjudicated anyway. And this costs the laboratories a lot of time and money. And concern is that this may have no real impact on the usefulness of the data in accomplishing a project's objectives. In some cases, if it's a major project, it could put the laboratory at risk of bankruptcy. So, and this is counter to the data quality objective process. I mean, you go through those in the quality assurance project plan or QSM to decide what's needed, and then you have these decisions that are not based on that. So the question is, what can be done to set up a system whereby when situations like this arrive, the laboratories can be brought into the picture that can sit down with a data reviewer or somebody else to resolve these issues. And one of the things we would like to put on the table at next week's meeting, when we have representatives of a number of parts of EPA and DOD and so, is to see how we can address this issue, for their help in addressing this issue. One solution that has been suggested is that when there is a system can be set up that when there is a disagreement on validity of data with respect to its suitability for a particular purpose, the laboratory should be allowed through I don't know what the process should be set up to sit down with the government data reviewer or the contracting officer to resolve the issues. And if an agreement can't be reached at this level, then, and let's say the agency's contracting officer does not feel that they have the expertise to address this, that they should set up a small review panel, let's say a couple of people, experts from the government, that could adjudicate the issue. And so this is an issue that has been brought to our attention, and we thought that's important to address. And what the rest of our members feel about this as being an issue that we should address. And if there's any body from the EPA or anybody else from the government that's on the call that might know that of another mechanism for addressing this issue, please speak up.
Yeah, so I've got a real quick comment. Just to kind of back it up for a second, I just kind of wanted to bring this up just simply because I think it's pertinent to the discussion. We actually had this brought forth to us by two of our member labs, one small lab and one large network lab. And I point that out because what that tells us is that this isn't a unique issue to just to just laboratories that do a lot of large contracts. I mean, it's not unique in any specific way like that. We've got laboratories of all sizes and of all types of contracting that does different types of work for the government, and these two in particular have both experienced an issue with this. So, and not saying that it's pervasive, and not saying it's even necessarily a problem in every contracting unit, if you will, but I will say that the couple of circumstances that have come up has pointed out that there is a need for a process for this. And so I do extend the same question to any of our government folks that are on the phone, that if they know of a process, one that works, or that currently works for their division or department within their agency, we would certainly love to hear about it, if not on this call, but maybe through an email, or just set up some time to talk, because it's basically, I'm not going to call it an arbitration process, but it's an appellate process, or it's a process to bring two dissenting opinions together, and find a way to make the data useful, and come across those barriers. So anyway, I'll stop there. David, anything else that you want to bring up or say about that?
No, is it any, is this, how big a problem has this been to other laboratories? Have they faced this problem? And also, does anybody know of any situation where the government has done this, where let the laboratory and the data reviewer try to come to an agreement, and if not, set up a system to have a third party adjudicate it, either at the state level or federal level? Anybody have any expertise, experience in that?
Hi, David. This is Lem. We routinely receive inquiries from laboratories in similar situations, but we tend to actually try to address it and always include either the state or the regional contact in those responses. The trouble has been that in the state programs, the state, especially the state with primacy, they pretty much is the decider when these issues come up. The one plus thing is that they are willing to sit down and to discuss an issue, and that's about us as far as we've been able to get it to go. I'm not certain if we can ever formalize the process, because again, states with primacy can pretty much be as stringent as they like.
Yeah, and that's been my experience with when there's an issue at the state level and they come to EPA, and we just try to use our good offices to get the parties to sit down together. But do you know if there's any on federal contracting, since I've been away from it so long, is there any mechanism for subcontractors to go directly to contracting officers on contract issues?
Well, I don't know if there's such a thing, but I do recall a long time ago there were these, $800 numbers, and sometimes there were like this website to capture people's concerns, and somebody within the group would address those concerns. Since then, those helplines have gone away as far as because of budgets. So
Yeah,
what happens now is that myself, Adrian, and anyone, and the other chemists would get questions from the labs and respond. But again, it's been working in a sense of just finding the contact in the state or the regions, and getting them involved in that decision.
yeah,
Some things we've not been very successful on, but
yeah. I remember at one time, I think EPA had a small business ombudsman
mhm.
that a laboratory could go to if necessary. I don't, do they still have that?
I'm
Or
not certain. I'm
or
not
has that
certain.
gone by the wayside also?
Yeah. My go-to is just I consulted with William Lips, and William Lips actually said this was the right answer. So that usually works a little bit. I'm only joking. That's just joking.
Yeah, I mean, what we may have to do, ACIL may have to sit down with, for example, government contracting executive. I don't know who the right person would be, and maybe we can think about that, Lem, and you could give some suggestions, or Brian can give suggestions on who we might be able to talk to that could set up some kind of a system like this. And then people like you and Adrian and Troy and people like that would be available to sit on an adjudication panel to look at that, who have expertise. So,
Judy, TNI has something in place that address those kind of issues. Is that correct?
Yes, they do. They actually have a formalized complaint and appeal process. So it might be something worth looking at. I think with this, I think possibly the key to it is understanding the pathway, the proper pathway, if you will. If it is, if it's a government contract, depending on what the agency is, to make sure that it gets through to the right people. Because I think some of the struggles have been just the barriers to get the conversation going. So I certainly think that we could discover some potential pathways just by talking to some of our organizations and potentially some of the other agencies, like the information that you just gave us, Lim. So thank you for that.
yes.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. We get a record about maybe, I want to say about 40 or so inquiries per month. So it's quite a bit.
Oh wow, yeah, that is. Okay.
Okay. So that's just some of the issues that are before us. You may get a call, an email asking for participation in maybe a work group or task group to help address some of those issues in the near future. I'm talking all our members.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna move on to a next item. So we're still on the PFAS update. This isn't necessarily directly involved with PFAS, but I will say that it kind of ties in with all of the constituents or chemicals or contaminants of emerging concern, however named. The state of California, and I'm not picking on California, this just happens to be one of the newest things going on, put out a bill, and I think it was early February, end of January, and it was called SB 230. And what this bill is it has to do with constituents of emerging concern, which we all know that PFAS, even though we all know about it, still falls in that category because it's still not well defined. So, but along with this, things such as microplastics and other things, personal care products, endocrine disruptors, things like that all fall into this category. So one of the things that a number of the states, or the states with a larger population, struggle with is seeing these constituents of emerging concern earlier in the process because they have more people helping to transmit some of these constituents to the environment. So and when I say transfer it, I'm talking about through our wastewater systems, through our drinking water, and so on and so forth. Just the sheer use and reuse of resources, puts things back in the environment. So they came out with this bill. The purpose of it is to identify a pathway to be able to get methods and technologies in place so that they can monitor for these chemicals reasonably and with the best science. And so one of the charges underneath this bill is the establishment of a science advisory panel. And the reason why this came up to me is because being on LTAC, the Environmental Lab Technical Advisory Committee, we have a subcommittee that we have just established for a similar process. So the process being to come up with a method and test procedure that the state agencies can follow, that once it gets to the point where a federal entity is ready to regulate it, there's not a lot more of things that have to be done. So just to kind of, and I know Lim and Adrian, who are both on the phone, will appreciate what I'm about to say. There are alternate test protocols in place by the EPA under all offices. The drinking water office has one. Matter of fact, I think they have three. I think they're divided up: inorganic, organic, and micro. The Clean Water Act has one for new protocols as well as alternate protocols. Under the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery, they also have a process as well for a new method or for bringing a method to them that's been vetted under a certain protocol. So I say all this to say, and I know you got to be asking yourself, and I think everybody knows the answer, even if you are, why are we doing this? Why are we talking about this? And why are we doing this if all those things are out there? Because the reason why we're doing this is because even with all of those things out there, there's still no one accepted process or protocol. So what we hope to do, and I sent Lim an email on this, and I don't know that there's really a great answer for this, but what we hope to do is we hope to take all of these procedures and take a look at them and bring together the best of each procedure, and realizing, of course, matrices and all of those things come into play, especially from a compliance perspective, because at the end of the day, that's why we have different compliance programs, because they're catering to different matrices. So, but ideally, if we could bring all of the different matrix things together in a pathway where it says, here's what you do up to this point, and if I'm this, then I go to the left. If I'm this, I go to the right. If I'm this, I go straight through. Whatever I am as a chemical, the hope would be is that there would be a process that this could take, and once it gets to the end, you've identified a checklist, you've identified the things in place that meet an assessment, a basic assessment criteria process, and you can go to market with that method, and the state be happy that you've ticked off all these boxes. So we've got all these procedures that have been put out by the state agencies, and then I made the mistake of asking about what does ASTM have, and my buddy William, who's on the phone, William Lips, sends me not only that protocol, but this plethora of others from AOAC and other entities that also have protocols for this. So now we've got probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 different protocols that we're going to take a look at, some of which we'll eliminate pretty quick because they just don't fit. But others, it's an opportunity to bring them together. So this effort will hopefully help drive the future of how quickly we can bring a technology into the fold and bring it to a place of acceptance. Because before efforts like this happen, you've already had a lot of researchers in the background that have used certain technologies to identify that these things are even in the environment at any particular level. So you've had a lot of qualitative going on, more qualitative than quantitative, I think, at that point. But then when you get to the quantitative part, and there's a realization that there's high levels of these things, that's when it comes down to, okay, as a state agency from a public health protection perspective, I've got to regulate this. Who's going to do this, and how are they going to do it? So this ideally will be the process, because it will be ahead of other regulations. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's any comments or questions, but that is an effort that's going on right now, which we hope will benefit all programs at some point. Any comments or questions? Okay, perfect. Then I must have done a really good job covering that, or everybody's asleep. So, and if it's the second one, in about 6 minutes, Patsy Root's going to take the floor, and she's going to talk about COVID and wastewater, which is something that, again, another emerging contaminant. And oddly enough, she's going to be talking about accreditation and the process to get us to accreditation, because while it's it's not just national concern, it's a global concern. But speaking for our group and for EPA and what we deal with here at home, it is a big national concern, because right now, from the standpoint of monitoring for it in metropolitan areas, there is a lot of interest around that, a lot of media, a lot of data that's being put together for this, and there's a lot of statistics out there on the web if you just get out there and search it. And the idea is that, you know, from a wastewater perspective, you're able to predict hotspots, if you will, from the standpoint of occurrences in large municipalities and things of the sort. It is also helping us to understand a little bit about the virus itself, and basically some of the characteristics of it from the point at which it is in the human body and alive till it leaves the human body and is out in the environment. Anyway, with that being said, if Patsy, if you want to,
Judy,
yes,
Judy, I
yes,
couldn't get off my mic get my mic fast enough. Just one closing, one comment to piggyback on the previous topic regarding what is going on in California, but I think you're bringing to the group. One of the things that we, being out here in California was really attempting to drive from the regulation standpoint early, particularly with regards to PFAS. And so I think it's in all of our interests to be able to come up with what you're currently working on, obviously within LTAC, regarding some kind of the validation protocols and so forth, because what we saw really early on was the regulatory community not fully understanding, and this obviously specific to California in this particular case, not really understanding the limits of the methodologies. And so what things that were coming across my radar screen were things like EPA 537 modified being written into discharge permits with no real consideration for what that actually meant. I received a call from a regulator one day that said, okay, I know there's 537.1, who developed 537.1 modified? And I went, whoa, time out. And so having some standard by which, methods are, can be evaluated as things are coming up, can hopefully add a little bit, maybe more standardization to some of these things, because they are trying to move faster than certainly what we're accustomed to in terms of, new methods forthcoming and the whole validation process. So, I certainly would recommend if we can come to something like that, it might save us all a whole lot of headaches in the future in terms of dealing with, Bob's method or Brad's method or whatever, whatever that means. And unfortunately gets written into, regulation that way.
thank you, Brad. Those are all important and good points. That it's a part of the intel that I don't have because I'm not located out there in California and know some of that history. But I can say this: we have all experienced at some point in our time where a customer has called us, or even an agency has approached us and said, we have this on a permit, the method that is specified isn't appropriate, and they want to specify a drinking water method or an SWA 46 method or something else. And in some cases, it's valid because of whatever is on whatever the type discharge it is isn't suitable for the technology being specified, and you have to look elsewhere. But you also have to go through processes, and this would speak to potentially to a process that you may have to go through. So anyway, so thank you for those comments, Brad. I appreciate it. Adrian, your mic is on. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just about to piggyback on that and say, it's a very long process to get any method through EPA, but I just think it's very helpful for the laboratory community and anyone else if there are other methods available that are there through ASTM or standard methods, or really any type of organization that isn't just one lab saying here's my method. So if you want to be another place where this happens, I'm all for it, just because it's a lot nicer to point to a method that has had lots of people look at it and hopefully has been tested at several labs than just say, as you said, 537 modified. I've heard that story so many times I can't even keep track of it anymore.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Just simply because the modified, all that means to any of us is that it started out as 537 and now it's something else, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same depending on who's calling it modified. So I definitely agree with that. And the hope would be is that we could bring some consistency to it. So Anyway, has anybody got any other comments on this process? Okay, beautiful. We'll keep everybody updated on it as it moves along. It's very much in its infancy. You've got two groups within a committee working on it, and one is driving the actual ATP process, and the other is driving the purpose, the overall purpose for the process. So SOP, if you will, versus actual the actual pathway itself. So it'll be a great combination of two groups of people. But with that being said, I'm going to give the floor to Patsy Root. And Patsy, if you'll take a minute to introduce yourself. I think most everybody on here knows you, but if you'll take a minute to just introduce yourself, I would greatly appreciate that.
Certainly, Judy. So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Patsy Root. I work with IDEX. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Manager there. And I've been involved in laboratory operations from the microbiological side for almost 15 years now. It's gone by pretty quick. And I've been involved in a lot of standards organizations over the years. And I'm a fairly new member to ACIL. I would say, the past year, I've been involved with ESS. And of course, during COVID, IDEX has been involved in trying to help various states and countries around the globe address the pandemic in any way that we can. But what we're doing within ACIL is we're looking at wastewater and COVID testing as a way to monitor what's happening in a particular community, state, or even in a building. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. So there's a small group within ESS that was charged with looking at the SARS-CoV-2 wastewater surveillance testing, but looking at not a particular methodology or process for the testing, but to look at all of them to understand how we can put in place a laboratory accreditation process to help states and communities and any other data users feel assured of the quality of the data when they're making public health decisions. So what I'm going to show you guys today is just a brief overview of the value of the actual testing and then what the ESS group is focusing on. And if anybody has any questions, just yell out. So at the moment, they're looking at wastewater to be able to trend the concentration of SARS-CoV-2 in wastewater and have that be correlated to clinical cases. And what several areas around the world are seeing are that wastewater testing can preclude a change in the population's SARS-CoV-2 in people. And these data here show, excuse me, the confirmed cases on the right-hand chart in light gray, and how you can see the wastewater surveillance of the virus predicts the spikes and the valleys in some way, shape, or form. So wastewater surveillance has a lot of advantages over clinical testing. And actually, one of the best things is that you are doing the wastewater surveillance independent of anybody seeking health care. So you're essentially assessing everybody in like, say, the town, whether they go to the clinic and get tested themselves or not. And the data are available within a few days compared to a very long lag for other types of data. They're pooled samples. Nobody's identified in the sample of the wastewater. And it can be used to identify trends at a sub-regional level. So you can see in the charts here the changes from May 18th to May 24th, and then from mid-June, and then into early July, where the areas of cases are showing up more densely in certain areas. So wastewater surveillance is a really good tool, and it's not actually a new one. Wastewater surveillance has been used for other things around the world, like for polio, assessing for polio, looking for drugs of abuse in certain areas, so that public health decision makers can better understand where problems may be, and also where, you know, mitigation efforts have been put in place, how successful they are. One of the questions that I've heard a lot lately is, well, does the wastewater surveillance work if you're looking for the new variants? I mean, I don't know about any other states, but here in Maine, we have both the South African and the UK version of the virus here. I'm not sure if every other place has it, but yeah, lucky us. And that should not say testes. I don't know. My spelling evidently didn't work. So, but the tests are not affected by the mutations because of where most of the tests that are being used that have been developed mostly through universities are focused on the N genes, the N1 and the N2. And the UK variant does have some mutations in the spike gene and the N gene and the ORF1 AB gene, but they don't have any effect on the actual wastewater tests that are being used right now. But the other thing is too, is that these tests won't distinguish between variants. You won't be able to tell with most of the wastewater tests that are being employed now, whether you have, you know, the regular SARS-CoV-2 or if you have a UK or a South African variant. You will just know if there's SARS-CoV-2 present. So how are these data being used? Well, there are a lot of metropolitan areas and some states that are already using data coming out of wastewater testing. And most of the testing originated, as it should, within universities and research laboratories. And it reminded me and some others that have been in this for a while of how we started with cryptosporidium testing. That, you know, the testing started at the university level and they came up with ways to find the oocysts and oocytes of cryptosporidium and giardia. And then when it got more into the public and the public, especially health professionals, started to rely on this data, the testing moved out of university labs, which are not inclined to perform routine testing, into the commercial and state lab arena. And similar to that, this wastewater SARS-CoV-2 testing can detect the presence of COVID-19 in individuals. It can anticipate trends. It can inform decisions on clinical testing. Should you move your clinical testing to different areas based on what the wastewater data are telling you? It can help inform public health officials on how to communicate about the disease. And it can monitor the impact of mitigation strategies. And we've even, and I know other places have as well, employed testing at dormitories within universities. And actually, I think it was St. Joseph's College saw a really big spike in the wastewater coming out of the combined area where the dorms were. And they decided to shut down the university and they avoided an outbreak. And so it really does work and people are using it. But the concern that was brought up within ACIL was that, you know, this is an instance that it really highlights that both environmental and clinical testing data are important when you're making public health decisions. And we understand intuitively when we go to a clinic and we're tested individually for, you know, SARS-CoV-2, that testing will be performed in a CLIA certified laboratory. But the data that's coming out about wastewater and is being used to make decisions about public health and communicate about public health should also be performed in an accredited laboratory. And that is the goal of this group, is to develop an accreditation checklist and a program to promote the use of an accreditation checklist for SARS-CoV-2 wastewater surveillance. So ESS group, and many of them are on this call today, and a handful of key stakeholders agreed to focus on laboratory accreditation for wastewater COVID testing. Not only to create, but to promote laboratory accreditation processes and documents that will come out of this group that allows for quality laboratory processes, procedures, and assure that the data that are produced are fit for purpose. So the team includes folks here with the ACIL ESS group. There are representatives from EPA, from the CDC, from the Water Research Foundation, from the Association of Public Health Labs, and from TNI. And we're focusing on developing a checklist that can help deliver reliable public health data. And what we are first doing is aligning on those key quality assurance, quality control aspects for all different types of wastewater SARS-CoV-2 testing. There are a number of steps for concentration, for extraction, and there's at least a couple of different kinds of PCR that are being utilized. We will have a final audit checklist and ensure that laboratories and ABs, assessing bodies, both governmental and non-governmental, have an opportunity to look at the list and then make it available to the public and promote it in order to produce reliable public health data. And what the checklist will do is set the QA/QC expectations for each part of the process for the assay. There are several complicated parts to get to a final result, and a lot of opportunity. When you have a lot of steps in a method, there's a lot of opportunity for measurement uncertainty. So if we can control that as much as possible, then lab A and lab B, whether it's intra-laboratory variability, will be decreased. And then you are more assured that, you know, the data users find the data fit for purpose. And the steps for each of the different processes that we're putting QC/QA parameters around are sample checks, the standard curve as it relates to RT-PCR at least, pre-treatment options, concentration options, extraction of RNA options, PCR either real-time or digital drop, and then results interpretation and data reporting, because that seems to be the place where there's a lot of variability in how do I use these data. So we're putting the checklist together with these 7 lines of information. And when we have the checklist, the audit checklist done, we and the participating stakeholders will make it publicly available for use. Our goal is to work through the adoption process so that laboratories could get accredited under ISO 17025 first. Then we'll be talking about and exploring the TNI and state options and any other ways that we might be able to promote and communicate these tools to laboratories and other users. So that's the basics of what our group is working on right now. And I'm open to taking any questions that anybody might have or ideas as well. Judy, I think they're still asleep.
Well, I'm not, so.
You're not?
So
Okay.
So I have a comment. So having been involved with this group and working with Stacy Crandall, Hampton Road Sanitation on the calibration checklist piece of this, what I'm learning is something that I already knew but have certainly had confirmed, and that's that there is a lot more to PCR than what I realized, just from the standpoint of the differences in technology. So as we talk about calibrations and certain things for the assessment piece to this, we're looking at qPCR for being quantitative PCR, and then digital droplet PCR, which I think droplet is I don't know, it's a type of digital PCR. But nevertheless, what we're finding is that the way you calibrate for these things is really quite different. So, as we flesh these things out, along with the extractions and the sample preparation, it's pretty eye-opening, and it makes us realize that the paths to defining the types of technology and how we use them has to be somewhat flexible, but it also has to be rigid enough to keep us in kind of color in between the lines, if you will, so that we're still striving for the same quality control criteria that everyone who uses it can actually execute, and do it so within reason and within consistency, so that the data as we use it for this modeling and these predictors is reliable.
I mean, that's the hard part, right? I mean, there are so many different permeations on ways you can do extraction or ways that you can do concentration. The goal of it is to be able to feel you can rely on the data no matter which laboratory is doing it. And that to me is kind of what we finally got to in the end with crypto, when that big study at the Water Research Foundation landed on, EPA methods. And I don't know if we'll ever get to that point with this, but I do, in talking with people, I do feel like wastewater surveillance isn't going to go away now, which is a really big leap forward for environmental, especially wastewater laboratories. It's a huge leap. Getting it right is important because we're making decisions with people's lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is a big effort, because I mean, we're bringing together a group of people to understand the best use of technology for this, and the best way to ensure that all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, regardless of whether or not it's, quantitative PCR, if it's digital droplet PCR, or how the instrumentation piece of it actually is being, is being deployed.
And I think too, the bigger part of that is that, the stakeholders have all agreed that this information needs to be made available to the public, and not, as with any information, it's no good unless you share it. And I anticipate it'll be more a living document than a static one. We may come up with, who knows, a new extraction or new concentrations, or we may narrow the field to particular processes that just through natural selection end up being landed on, so I anticipate it will change over time, but I think having this available to the public will be a great service to, states and municipalities that are thinking about doing this.
Yeah, jumping off on what you had said earlier, Patsy, I mean, given the concern with other variants coming out, COVID variants, similar kinds of problems, this may be the only really efficient way that government can monitor what's happening, and get on front of a problem instead of waiting until people are getting very sick and seeing. So this kind of monitoring maybe become a fairly routine way of getting a handle on emerging illness problems.
It could be. And like I said, David, it's not really that new. It's just we needed a way. Yeah, we needed a way to understand this, and in lieu of getting every single person tested every single week, this is, in my mind, the better way of doing it.
That's why I expect it'll last longer than just, when the COVID thing, the current COVID issue.
So Patsy, are you looking at MALDI too as a detection?
No, but if we should be, you should let me know.
I don't know. It's complicated, but
yeah, that's more of an identity.
Well, you still got to do the PCR, but then you do the MALDI and you can actually identify what's there based on the pattern.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. Maybe we can wait on that one a little bit.
Yeah, this has been difficult because I must have 14 different protocols now trying to get, you know, information about what is important for this protocol to make sure you get it right. And
Well, it'd be nice for the sampling and the sample prep and concentration part to be all one protocol, right? Not 15 different ones.
well, yeah, it would be, but you know, I think, you know, because, you know, the organic nature, the development of these assays, you know, at various universities or research facilities and stuff, everybody has their own homebrew.
Well, I don't mean the PCR reagents. I mean the sampling itself.
Yeah, yeah. I think sampling.
The sampling and the concentration of the sample before you pull out that 10 microliters.
Yeah, yeah. I agree.
I want to thank you for the update. This is, I mean, you know, as with everything that we do, I mean, as we learn, you know, new things about new contaminants and where we're trying to go with them, it's always helpful to have the experts that have been on the forefront of, you know, helping to develop some of the technology and testing for it. So certainly appreciate your time in the update, and as always, very informative. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thanks, Patsy. Enjoy your Senate meeting.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. So is there any other questions or interests on the information that Patsy just gave? I mean, the one thing that kind of comes to mind is it's just reinforcement that, you know, as we move forward, you know, we will start seeing more and more technology, and we will see more of these challenges. So, you know, the more that the community itself can communicate and work through a lot of these things, the quicker we'll be able to use these technologies. So, any other questions or comments for the day? Once again, everybody, thanks so much for all of your time today and for being on here with us. We certainly do appreciate all the feedback and especially the discussion from earlier. And Zanetta, all of your information on what's going on with accreditations. I did by chance get a response back from one of our NELAC accreditors up in Utah. Basically said that they have still conducted majority of their in-state assessments in person, but their out-of-states are presenting their challenges, so they're still doing virtual out-of-state. And then got one in from a third-party assessor that basically said that they've done, her and her teammate have done 50 assessments this year, and 40% of those were actually done in person. So it hadn't been quite as virtual as I thought it was, but it's been pretty virtual. So I look for the hybrid going forward. But anyway, that's just kind of my closeout for this. And I appreciate everybody's attendance. Dave Friedman, did you have something you wanted to say?
Nope, I'm good. Just remember, everybody, next week we'll have session 2 with our government colleagues, also starting at noon.
Absolutely, and that's one to attend, because that's where we'll get to hear what's going on firsthand from with EPA. And I do want to thank Lim and Adrian both for being on with us today. We appreciate it, and Mike Oscar for your updates on the government as well. Zoe, did you have a parting statement?
I was just going to say thank you to you and David for putting this together.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Thank you. We've enjoyed it, or I have. I can't speak for David, but I think he has.
I'm a glutton for punishment, so I must be enjoying it, right?
I understand. All right, folks. Well, we appreciate your time for the day, and have a good rest of the week. Until next week.
Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
David and
Thanks,
Bob.
Judy.
Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.